You're listening to the Morphology Podcast. Thanks for tuning in to the Morphology Podcast, aka Murph here to share interviews about biking experiences from cyclists who have pedaled to places all over. Each week, we will get to know new people and explore new destinations to ride your bike. As you listen to these adventures, you may wonder, why haven't I done that yet? Well, on the show today, you'll meet Ben Gibbs. He's a musician and podcaster who I met while biking the Katy Trail. That was basically Ben's first crack at bikepacking, and he was hooked. He upgraded his gear and his bike and went on an epic 6-week bicycle tour, exploring the C&O Towpath, the Gap Trail, and the Empire State Trail. He traveled over 1,100 miles by bike and describes his experience along with the genuine kindness of strangers. So here's Ben. A quick interruption to tell you this week's podcast is sponsored by Lizard Lips Lip Balm. These great lip balms contain natural ingredients, come in a variety of flavors, and you can choose certified organic or balms with sun protection. Check it out at lizardlips.net. Now back to the show. All right, well, on the show we have Ben Gibbs. Hey, Ben.
Hi, how are you?
I'm very good. I just got done with I think it's like a 3-hour bike ride. We basically have one north-south trail here in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And so that's pretty much, you kind of figure out which way the headwind and the tailwind is and away you go. So I had to break off early so that I could make sure I was back for our podcast. But I have some friends who are still out there. They probably found a bar or a bench to hang out on. So they're still out there somewhere.
Well, perfect.
Yeah. Well, you were on the podcast actually, I should back up. We met briefly when we were both on the Katy Trail last fall. And
yes, correct.
You were in the middle of an adventure and I was in the middle of an adventure. And so our paths crossed. And now here we are again to talk a little bit more about bicycle adventure.
Yeah, I love it. I love how it comes back around.
Yeah, definitely. And I know you just got done with a pretty amazing long bike adventure. So I want to get into that. But first, would you mind telling the listeners maybe a little bit about where you live, what cycling is like there, and just anything you want to share about yourself?
Sure. So, my name's Ben. I'm a musician, podcaster as well.
Oh, cool.
And really traveling by bike is kind of my new preferred way of travel.
Mm-hmm.
I've done a bit of traveling internationally, but just kind of got into bike touring and bike packing in the last year and a half or so. So I live in Western North Carolina in the town of Marion, but most people know Asheville, North Carolina. It's pretty popular now. It's about 45 minutes east, and world-class mountain biking here. Pisgah Forest is getting a lot of attention. It's really, really great. Near my town, Marion, it should be maybe completed in 10 to 15 years. It's called the Fonta Flora Trail. It'll stretch 100 miles. It's 90% off-road, single track trail. They're working on it now. Most of it's on Lake James. And which, fun fact, Lake James is where Last of the Mohicans was filmed.
Oh.
So I'll get into more about that later. It's very beautiful here. It's quite gorgeous. So Bent Creek is a very popular place to mountain bike.
Mm-hmm.
Lake James, Pisgah National Forest. There's some, like I said, world-class mountain biking here. And I do a little bit of that, but this trip I just took was my first kind of push into bike touring.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Mm-hmm. And I talk about bike touring quite a bit on this podcast, and there's a little bit of difference between bike touring and bike packing. And in my opinion, bike packing would be more about what you just talked about with a single track. You're kind of a little bit away from civilization and, maybe cell service or opportunities for food. So it's a different packing schedule, but you were bike touring, correct?
This is correct, yes.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about bike touring, maybe your bike setup. Did you have bags? Or what's your normal way to bike tour?
So what I did after this first bike packing trip where you and I met, I wanted to do more kind of somewhat road oriented
Mm-hmm.
or designated bike path like crushed limestone. So I started researching what I would need, and I ended up buying off of Facebook Marketplace a 57-inch frame Jameis.
Ooh.
It's a Jameis Aurora.
Mm.
I think it's about maybe a 10-year-old bike or something. 700 millimeter tires, 32-inch millimeter diameter tire. And it was very bizarre how it all worked out. I started thinking about taking this trip in December or January, and I wasn't sure where I was going to go. I was going to maybe go to Europe and do some of the Eurovelo routes.
Mm.
But I quickly said, well, this is a bit too ambitious to go out of the country for my first bike tour, so I'll stay in the States. So I was on Facebook Marketplace looking in December, and I found the bike that I was looking for, the one that I've purchased. And I didn't buy it. And I said, well, maybe I'll hold off, I'll wait. And I still hadn't purchased a bike for this trip in March.
Oh.
And I look on Marketplace, it's still there, the same bike.
Wow.
And I just messaged the woman who was selling it. And she said, if you want it, you'll have to come tomorrow because I'm leaving for Denver the day after tomorrow for 3 months. So I said, okay, well, I'll come tomorrow. So I went up there. It was very cold, very windy. It turns out it was her best friend. It was a he. I don't remember his name. That he had passed away.
Oh.
He had died on some sort of adventure. And I didn't ask, and she didn't describe. And she said that his widow had finally really came to terms with this and said, it's time to get rid of these things.
Mm.
So I paid $400 for the bike.
Wow.
And rode it and tried to understand it because I'd never been on that kind of setup. It was all very it was very strange, you know. And so I just said, well, yeah, I think this is the bike. So I bought it, and that was it. So I came into possession of this person's bike and began accumulating equipment. I bought a rack, and I had 2 panniers on it. I can't remember the brand, but you see them a lot as intro panniers to bike touring. They're red and yellow, or they're yellow and black, and 27-liter bags, totally waterproof. So I strapped those on, had a 20-liter waterproof bag that I kind of bungeed on to the bike rack, and carried sleeping bag, bedroll, stove, all that stuff. A little too many clothes. But when I started this trip in April, it was still very cold in DC.
Yeah, you probably have to dress for multiple seasons, when it's that early.
I was overpacked, but I said, what can I get rid of? Nothing. I need all this because it got cold, sometimes.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's kind of my setup of what I took on this trip.
So I see you're on the Katy Trail, but are you referring to your first adventure was the C&O Towpath, or?
No, my first bikepacking adventure was the Katy Trail where we met.
Oh, got it.
So
okay.
So just recently, then this is like I bought a touring bike, this new bike I got off Facebook for this trip that I just took. I wanted to buy another bike more suitable because I knew I'd be on the road a little bit and also mostly bike path. So I said, well, the mountain bike I have is not suitable for this at all. I'm going to have to get another bike.
Sure.
So that's what I did.
Yeah, and for those listeners who have not been on the Katy Trail, I would highly recommend checking it out. I mean, it's not paved, but I never really felt like, it was kind of a crushed limestone, almost packed dirt. Wouldn't you describe that as the surface?
Yeah, I would. Yeah.
Yeah, and I felt like there was a town, I don't know, every 7 to 10 miles. There wasn't always like more than just residents, maybe not always a bar, restaurant, or a gas station, but there was always like civilization close by.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we were doing Airbnbs along the way, but were you camping? A quick interruption to introduce our newest sponsor, Hammerhead. The Hammerhead Karoo 2 cycling computer helps you find your path forward and unlock your full potential on every ride. And listen, for a limited time, listeners can get a free heart rate monitor with the purchase of a Hammerhead Karoo 2. Visit hammerhead.io and use promo code Murphology at checkout to get yours today. Now back to the show.
I was camping, yes.
And how did that go?
Well, it proved to be difficult sometimes, but, on the Katy Trail, you can camp 10 feet on either side of the trail because it's designated state park.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah, and so you can do that. The place, the gem of camping on the Katy Trail is at a place called Cooper's Landing.
Oh, yes. I remember that campground.
Oh, my God.
And the bar across the street.
Yes, it was one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the best camping. I camped in Herman, the town of Herman. Yeah, you can camp in one of their parks there by the river. It was great too. Good. I happened to be there when they were having Oktoberfest, and the population went from 2,500 to 25,000.
Oh my gosh, are you kidding?
Yeah, and it was pandemonium.
Yeah.
I mean, it was madness, all the things that went on that night.
Wow, that's crazy. So, you talked a little bit about your bike setup, that you had 2 panniers and then another bag that kind of went on your bike rack, and maybe packed a little bit too many clothes, but, I do the same thing. But are you a guy that carries any luxury items, like whether it's a little bottle of whiskey or a deck of cards or a special book?
I carried several bottles of whiskey at various stages in the trip. I did not carry any cards. I thought about taking my tarot cards, but I ended up just saying no. Yeah. And then I took one book, and it was Carl, the Swiss psychoanalyst Carl Jung wrote this book in 1959. 2 years before he died, on the UFO phenomenon.
Ooh.
It's a psychological approach to the UFO phenomenon. And it's like most of his stuff, it's kind of hard to decipher, but it's also very interesting to see his perspective on what this is. Yeah. And I read a little bit of that, but it got to where the ride was so intense, I didn't do anything but just literally stare most days and just decompress. Just staring off.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, you just get done and you're just like, I want to do a ton of things and go look around, but I think I'll just sit here. Or
I'll just stand.
Go to bed.
Yeah. I'll just sit here and drool till I fall asleep.
Okay, so you did Katy Trail, and then you get back home and you're like, I want to do something bigger.
Yes, something bigger now.
And
something longer, more advanced.
And what did you come up with?
So I selected the C&O Towpath and the Gap Trail from DC to Pittsburgh. And then I went from Buffalo, New York to Albany, did the whole Erie Canal Trail, which is part of the Empire State Trail system in New York. And then I went north. My plan was to go to Plattsburgh, up the Champlain River Valley, and then take a ferry into Burlington, Vermont. But I only made it to Lake George, which happens to be where Last the Mohicans was written and based out of.
Crazy.
So that
connection.
it was kind of trippy. And so but I didn't realize how much highway riding was involved.
Oh.
And the weather turned terrible, and I was on a highway with logging trucks and dump trucks going 75, 80 miles an hour with a 4-foot shoulder. And I said, this is too much. I'm not interested in this. So then I turned around. My brother lives in Manhattan, which is also the end of the Hudson River Greenway Trail that starts in Albany. So I rode from Lake George south all the way to Battery Park, Manhattan. So, DC to Pittsburgh, and then, Buffalo to Albany to Lake George to Manhattan. And then, that was it.
And was this kind of
1,140 miles.
Wow. So it was kind of one continuous trip, so to speak?
It was, yes. When I rented or I got a Amtrak from
Oh,
Charlotte. So I hauled my bike up there, and I had issues just instantly though. I didn't realize I had purchased the wrong rack, like pannier rack,
mm.
and it sat too high on the bike, and I didn't. And when I got to DC, um, the pannier bags had came off into the spokes,
Oh
and
no.
this continued on for days and days till I've got another rack, and then
Mm-hmm.
it was all But my bike was a little bit damaged en route with Amtrak, which I was not happy about, and I had to kind of piece it together a little bit and kind of fix it. So, but then everybody said when I got to DC, I said I'm doing the C&O Towpath and the Gap Trail. They said you're doing it backwards. Most people start in Pittsburgh
Yeah.
and go to DC because it's more downhill.
And yeah,
But the
I was just going to tell you the same. We did the opposite. We went to Pittsburgh and then went to DC, and it was mostly downhill. So
yeah.
you got an extra workout out of this deal.
Yeah, I didn't really know that the Eastern Continental Divide was coming out of like Frostburg. Oh my
Yeah.
God! And I was pedaling, and I was pedaling. It looked like it was flat, and I would pedal, and if I would stop pedaling, my bike would stop. And I was like, "What is going on here?"
Yeah, because the
But
grade is so low, right?
it's so
Yeah.
subtle, you don't realize you're climbing 3,200 feet and 16 miles.
Yeah. Wow. Good for you.
So, but it didn't work out with my route because I rented a car in Pittsburgh and drove to Buffalo.
Okay.
And very incidentally, this is quite a strange feeling. The that horrible mass shooting in Buffalo that happened in the supermarket.
Mm-hmm.
I was there the day
Whoa.
before it happened. I was in Buffalo,
Wow.
and yeah, that was a very strange feeling.
Yeah.
It kind of
Wow.
stayed with me a few days.
I can only imagine.
I mean, for many reasons, but
Mm.
being there was kind of strange.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So, how long did it take you to do these trips? You said it ended up being about 1,100 miles total.
Yeah, it was 6 weeks straight.
Oh, okay.
So I arrived in DC on April 25th. Yeah, April 25th, with the plan of staying for 2 days. And I had such a good time, I stayed for 5.
Really?
And yeah, because I hadn't been on a vacation and I had the money saved. I mean, I spent way too much in DC that I could have maybe stayed out 2 or 3 weeks longer if I wouldn't have spent all my money in Washington, D.C. at the very beginning. Because I had this pact with myself. I said, I'm going to eat a different ethnicity for every meal. You know,
Oh.
because in North Carolina, I mean, you can get like some ethnic food, but not like DC, and it's all great there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I had unbelievable Chinese, unbelievable Ethiopian, great Laotian food. I found the only marijuana dispensary you can smoke inside of in DC. This woman was like nobody I've ever met. She retired at probably age 39 or 41. I'm 38, and she was a few years older than me. She retired as a CFO,
Mm.
and she was the CFO for the Trump campaign. But the thing is, she was like the most apolitical person I've ever seen.
Hmm.
And she was like, yeah, it was terrible. It was insane. She's like, I can't even describe to you all the stuff I saw. But she's like, everybody I met became a business connection for
Mm.
that business. And she's telling me, and then like one night I'm listening to her give somebody business advice. And I'm like, my God, like I'm hearing like business counseling from a CFO. Like this is totally madness.
Wow.
But it was very fun. And then so I stayed in DC for 5 days. I left on the 30th. And so the trip started on April 30th.
Okay.
And it took about maybe 11 days total to do from DC to Pittsburgh.
Mm-hmm.
I was stuck for 3 days in Frostburg because it rained about 4 inches.
Oh, the same thing happened when we were in Frostburg.
Really?
Yeah, so I did, like I mentioned, Pittsburgh to DC, but we got stuck with a hurricane. So
Really?
we ended up having to, we could only do about, I don't know, less than 50 miles of the C&O Towpath, and then
Uh-huh.
it was flooded. So we had to turn around and then figure out a different way and then we ended up getting a ride to Washington, D.C., and then we went backwards
Oh,
until the flooding started again. So technically, I did not get to complete the whole thing. So I'm a little bit
oh,
jealous of
wow.
you.
Wow. Well, I technically didn't get to complete the Katy Trail
Yeah.
uh, because of the tornadoes that came through. I had to
Oh,
call it
okay.
short then. Yeah.
Okay. So when you think about C&O Towpath, Gap Trail, and the Empire State Trail, and just all of your adventures, do you have any highlights that you want to share? Whether it's cool people you meet, the terrain, crazy things, mechanicals, anything that you can think of?
I kind of, in retrospect, I prefer the C&O and the Gap
Mm.
over the Empire State Trail system. Several reasons. I thought, especially the C&O, like I said, I heard the people say the trail was kind of rough riding,
Mm-hmm.
and it was rough riding on a steel frame, no suspension with a rack. It was rough in some places, but the camping, because I camped basically the whole time.
Oh, you did. Okay.
Yes, I did. And so there's free camping it averages out every 8 miles. There's a free camp spot
Mm.
with potable water and fire pits, and it's beautiful. It goes along the Potomac. Most of that is designated bird watching sanctuary. So the sounds I heard, I'm there in early spring. Gorgeous. I got to see 3 sets of spring flower blooms,
Oh,
because I'm
cool.
always
Yeah.
moving north. So I'm always seeing. So, also the access to potable water on the C&O was
Mm-hmm.
a big help.
Mm-hmm.
On the Gap Trail, it was a little harder, but the Empire State Trail, my big gripe with it, and it's all very brand new. They've just finished it basically last year. But you can camp also on the Erie Canalway, 10 feet of either side of the canal, of the trail.
Okay.
It's very, very limited resources, but you go through enough towns to where it's okay, but there's no water on the trails. Once you get past Syracuse, my signage becomes very, very bizarre.
Mm.
Where the trail is very intuitive, where you know exactly where it's going,
Mm-hmm.
it's oversigned. Where you have to go through a town and take some strange detour, there are no signs.
Oh, so when you come into a town, the trail isn't obvious, so you have to.
It's hardly ever obvious,
Oh, wow.
and only in the larger cities. So in the town of Rome, New York, it was so difficult. I'm not even sure how it was laid out,
Mm-hmm.
because you have to go 2.5 miles through this town on the busiest roads.
Oh.
And it's like, oh my God, but I don't know what else you would do. Kept saying, surely there's a better way around this. But that was my main concern. And then when you get to the Champlain River Valley that goes to Rouse's Point, Canada, or the Hudson Valley Parkway south to Manhattan, there's no camping. You can't camp on the trail. It's because it's all private.
Oh.
In the north, you can camp on the locks because there's somewhat of a canalway you're on.
Mm-hmm.
But once you're past the canalway lock, there's no camping. And so people said, well, rely on Warm Showers, the app Warm Showers. So I downloaded Warm Showers, and especially from Albany to Manhattan, there's maybe 7 or 8 people you could warm shower with, but they all live 15 miles off the trail.
Away from the trail.
So, yeah. And so the stress of it it became quite stressful on how to navigate that.
And for people who don't know Warm Showers, it's basically just people like me or you that volunteer to take in cyclists. And
Yeah.
it's typically free, and some people will let you sleep in the yard, some people will let you sleep in the basement, maybe you get a bedroom, and then
Yeah.
sometimes you're fed as well. But it's really just kind of a hit and miss as to who wants to, host bikers.
Yeah.
So I can't imagine
Totally.
having to rely on that, when you're out there.
Yeah, it almost became like simulated homelessness.
Yeah.
And I mean it, I started to realize, oh my God, being homeless would be horrendous. The
Mm-hmm.
stress of this. I mean, and it's like, I kind of had the money. It was like, if it comes to it, I can go get a hotel, maybe, but maybe not. But it was very stressful in
Hmm.
that way. So it kind of made me much more kind of aware of what it means to be homeless.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it was quite eye opening.
And if the Empire State Trail system is relatively new, is that a paved surface or crushed limestone?
No, the route itself is relatively new,
Oh,
where
okay.
they've pieced it all together to where it's kind of one continuous thing, but it's the way that it sounds on the website is not really how it is in the field.
Oh, okay. Got it.
It is like the Erie Canal is mostly crushed limestone,
Okay.
and when you get to Albany and go north to the Champlain, it's mostly on-road riding
Mm-hmm.
and not much shoulder in some places. It's pretty nerve-wracking.
Mm-hmm.
And I spoke to several cyclists, and everyone I spoke to kind of dissuaded me from doing it because they said, I've done it once, I'll never do it again. I had Mountain Dew bottles thrown at me. There's dump trucks, feet away from me. And I said, well, yeah, God, that sounds kind of intense.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not really wanting that.
Interesting. And like if you think about all three of those, different segments as far as trails go, any like favorite stops, as opposed to some of the weird traffic situations?
Yeah, Frostburg was amazing. Met some great people there. Stayed in the hostel there at the bottom of the stairwell that goes into town. That was a lot of fun. Pittsburgh was great. I'd never been to Pittsburgh before.
Mm-hmm.
And I stayed at the, what's it called? Travelers Rest Biker Hostel.
Ooh.
So I really, really recommend people maybe stay there and start your trip there. It's bikers only. I forget the name of the people that own it. It's a husband and wife duo. The building is one of the most gorgeous buildings I've ever seen. It looks like the inside looks like an Orson Welles movie or something.
And what's the place called?
Travelers Rest Bicycle Hostel or something.
Okay, cool. Okay.
Yeah, it's incredible. As far as New York goes, Waterford was a very beautiful town I stayed in. My friends lived there. It was nice. Oh, I went down to the Finger Lakes. I forgot to mention that. I went south to the Finger Lakes, to Seneca Lake and Cuyahoga Lake. I was there for 10 days. And that was really nice, drinking a lot of nice wine. I had a few job offers. I was trying to get a job at a winery there, but they needed someone to stay till October, so I couldn't do that. But I may go back in September and work a grape harvest. So September to November. The way I ended up there is very funny. This is a really good story because what the big takeaway from the whole trip is how everything that needed to happen fell into place.
Oh, okay.
And random people took care of me so much. I honestly can't believe it. I was on the C&O. Do you remember Hancock, the town of Hancock on the C&O?
I don't know.
So yeah, totally forgettable town. I was walking. I got lost off the trail. A guy stopped, picked me up. I was having knee problems, and I needed to go to a Walgreens and get a knee brace. He took me there. My knee was messed up, or that's where my bike rack was kind of messed up. He took me to his house and we rebuilt my whole rack.
Oh my God.
Drank beer together. He took me all around town. Drove me to the next town over, to Hagerstown, Maryland, to see if the bike store was open. It was stuff like that all the time. So when I was going in, I was near Rochester, and I had a friend that I had met in 2006 at Bonnaroo Music Festival. And we had always kept in touch after then. And I knew that her and her husband lived in upstate New York, but I hadn't spoken to her in 5 years. And when I get to 60 miles east of Rochester, I Google her. And it turns out she's a midwife. And her office is in Rochester. And I go through 5 phone numbers on the websites to find out how I get in touch with her. And finally, I get on to a receptionist who leaves my name and number for her. She calls me back 20 minutes later, and I said, "Hey, I'm on a bike trip. I'm outside of Rochester." She said, "Well, you can stay with me." And I said, "Okay." So she lived in Waterford. So I did about 80 miles that day. And I get to her house. It was horrific to get there. My God, I mean, it was so hot. So I get to her house. We're hugging. We're so, reunited. She has a daughter who is amazing, so sweet. Husband's great. And she said that I told her that I was trying to get maybe a wine job in the Finger Lakes and stay for a month or two and make some money back. And her best friend, turns out, lives in Seneca Lake. Oh. So she gives me her phone. She said, and her family's been there forever. They live in like an artist community there. She knows all the wineries. She'll get you a job. So I get the number. The next day I leave, call her, ride 66 miles to Hector, New York. And I get there and immediately get 3 job interviews. I stay in a cabin that was, her father was a master woodworker. Oh, wow. And built a cabin from driftwood on Seneca Lake. Wow. So I'm staying here, I'm doing some work. I help them get the plumbing because I'm pretty handy. I'm a roofer also by trade. So I'm pretty handy. So help get the plumbing going, do some landscaping. I do some roof work for them. So it was all crazy how it all fell into place. I mean, it was all the doors always open all the time.
I think it's amazing, and you just described 3 situations right there, but how when you're on a bicycle, especially if you're all weighted down with all your gear, how genuinely interested and friendly people are, like strangers.
It's true. It is true.
Yeah. It kind of, changes the way you think about humanity when you're like, God, where am I going to stay tonight? And then poof, somebody pulls up and is like, "Hey, how are you doing today?" Or "What are you doing?" And then before you know it, you're best friends.
Here's another situation where that was when I was coming from Albany south to Manhattan. I went through a town called Germantown, and you'll go through it if you take the Hudson Valley Parkway. And at this point, I'm panicking because I know I have nowhere to sleep tonight, and I had already ridden 9.5 hours, and it's hot. I've done about 75 miles by then, and I get into Germantown at about 6 in the evening, and the sun's still pretty high, and it's very hot. And there's some sort of old bed and breakfast on the side of the main street there, and there's 2 people sitting outside. And I just stopped my bike. I knew instinctively to talk to this guy. And I just said, "Is there a brewery in this town?" Because I was like, I have to have a break. I need a beer or something. Like I can't pedal anymore.
Right.
He says, "No, but I have beer. Do you want a beer?"
Aww.
And I said, "Of course I do." Yes. So I sit on the porch. We're drinking beer. We're talking. We talk about 15 minutes. And he said, "Listen, I live a mile from here. Why don't you just put your tent up in my yard? You can take a shower. It'll be fine." And I said, "Okay, like you don't know what you've just done for me."
Yeah.
And so we're sitting there drinking, and I noticed that there was this very hip, sexy restaurant across the street. And it was so alive, and it looked awesome. And I'd noticed this group of people walking down the hill, and they kind of cross the street. I don't really look at them too much, and they disappear on the street because the sidewalk's going downhill behind the banister of the front porch where I'm looking out. And a couple of minutes later, they start walking back up the sidewalk. So just a few heads appear, through the railings. And me and this woman who was so beautiful, we made eye contact. And I immediately said, "I know this woman." And I thought, I said, "Where have I met her on this trip?" And I started to stand up to say, "Excuse me, where have we met?" And then I realized who it was. It was Frances McDormand.
What?
Yes.
The real one? The actress?
Yeah, the real one.
Oh, my gosh.
And I kind of like made a face, and I was like, "Oh, fuck, that's Frances McDormand."
Oh, my gosh.
And the guy, she was with another woman and a guy. And the guy walking with her noticed my bike. And he said, "Is this your bike?" So I immediately jump up, hoping she'll stay, and I can tell this big romantic, charming story about my bike trip. And of course, she walks off because she doesn't care. She's going home, and I kind of talk to him, and then they leave. And I turned to the people. I said, "Does anyone realize who that woman was?" And they said, "No." I said, "That was Frances McDormand." And they're like, "Who's that?"
Oh, no.
I'm like, Jesus Christ. So I have to give them this whole spiel about who Frances McDormand is. And they said, "Oh, yeah, no, that's not a surprise." They said, "This is a secret celebrity hangout."
Oh.
Said, Daniel Day-Lewis lives there. Paul Rudd lives there. And 2 or 3 other people that are more modern actors and actresses. They didn't ring a bell, but
Well,
yeah,
and it's
apparently some secret celebrity hideout. And the town is so gorgeous and cute.
oh, interesting. Well, and it's not a secret anymore because you just told everybody
out.
on this podcast.
Yes. Go tell Frances you saw me.
Just be like, remember the guy on the bike?
Yeah.
And she'll be like,
Remember that guy that looked like a skeleton that was questioning his existence, melting
man.
down on the porch?
Yeah. Oh, the genuine nice, people being nice is so cool. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was like that all the time. I mean, I was really quite taken aback by it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, anything else about those trips that you want to tell the listeners about? A quick interruption to introduce our newest sponsor, Hammerhead. So I use the Hammerhead Karoo 2 and really like how easy it is to read the data and to be able to scroll through screens mid-ride. It comes with a really sturdy handlebar mount, and it has a full color display that is also a touchscreen. You can personalize it to display data that means the most to you on your ride. One sweet feature is Climber with predictive path technology. It shows you upcoming gradient changes in real time, so you can mentally prepare for whatever is ahead. And of course, at the end of the ride, all my data automatically uploads to my Strava account. This is an exclusive limited time offer for our podcast listeners, so don't forget to use promo code Murphology. That's a free heart rate monitor with the purchase of a Karoo 2. Go to hammerhead.io, add both items to your cart, and use promo code Murphology. Now back to the show.
Go do it. I really highly recommend the C&O and the Gap. It's unbelievable. If you've not taken a bike trip, you should do it. If you have, you should keep doing it. It's really so rewarding. This is the most ambitious one I've done yet. Mm-hmm. And it was great. It was really something to push myself in that way. The last day was the worst day. I'll tell you about that. I stayed in a town called New Paltz, New York. And I realized this trip has got to end because why I had called the trip off, I lost use of my hands. My forearms from it wasn't carpal tunnel. It was somewhat like peripheral nerve damage where holding the bicycle grips for so long, mm-hmm. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't brush my teeth. I couldn't tie my shoes. And I couldn't shift gears. So the last day my shifter went out. I was having terrible shifter issues. And I said, that's it. Today's the last day. I can't do this anymore. And I pedaled 111 miles that last day. Dang. With 50 pounds on the bike. And for 70 of those miles, I was pedaling as hard as I could. And the last 48, it's kind of downhill mm-hmm. into Manhattan. But I'm nervous. I'm like, God, I'm 38 years old. This is ultra endurance athlete stuff. What am I doing? I'm afraid. I really thought maybe I was going to have a heart attack because I was so exhausted. Mm. And I get to the tip of Manhattan Island in the north on West 235th Street at 8:00 in the evening. And I had 13 miles to go to get to Battery Park. I went the entire length of Manhattan. Dang. But I had no lights on my bike. And I did it all with a headlamp. Coming through the streets, getting on the Hudson River Parkway, going through Spanish Harlem. I mean, I was absolutely beyond panicked. I was like, what am I going to do?
Right.
I'm like, I'm going to get hit by a car or go through the wrong neighborhood. It was so stressful. but nothing ever happened. And I made it to Battery Park at about 10:15 that night.
Oh,
And just,
man.
yeah, took 2.5 hours because I kept getting lost. Oh my God, it was something. So, I mean, these trips, you have the ultimate highs. The highs are unbelievable. You see the beauty of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
The lows, it's not good. You know, it's
Right.
like, oh my God.
And do you
You know,
think part of your hand issue was just because the terrain was so rough so that you were just constantly over gripping your handlebars?
it was that.
Ah,
It kind
okay.
of was that. Yeah. So, but, I did many, many 9-hour days
Mm.
and several 10-hour days.
That's a long time to be on the bike.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
And I listened to no music and no podcasts.
Wow.
I would just find myself singing songs, the same song. I sang that song by Bob Dylan, Isis, about 400 times. Just saying the lyrics over and over.
Really?
Yeah, it was crazy. I mean, I
Wow.
was really, but it was almost like a Zen practice, like
Yeah.
you really, it got to where, like, if you've ever done a meditation retreat or anything, a couple days in, your thoughts just leave. When there's no more thinking, you're
Mm-hmm.
just sitting on a bike 8, 9, 10 hours a day for weeks. There's nothing else to think.
Yeah, and
You're just,
especially in the first part of your trip where you weren't as concerned about where you were sleeping. So
you're right.
really your mind only had to, get on your bike, ride your bike, eat food, go to bed.
Yeah,
Like it was just simple
that's
thoughts.
it.
So I
Yes.
know exactly how you felt, at least at that part. But
Yeah.
then when you get to the point where you're like, shit, where am I going to sleep tonight? Like I
Yeah.
have
That's all
experienced
you
that
think
as
about.
well. Yeah, it
Yeah.
is.
And
Yeah.
then it's just, circular thoughts. It's like, oh my God, what have I done? Who am
Why am
I?
I
Who do
doing
I
this?
think I am? You know,
Okay, so you're done with the trip, you get home, and you kind of have that weird I'm going from just biking all day to kind of back to real life and,
yeah.
sleeping in a real bed and all that good stuff. So do you think you're going to have new adventures or do you have anything on the horizon yet?
Yeah, me and not a bike trip, but I got a friend that lives in Amsterdam. We're talking about going to Spain and Portugal for vacation
Ooh,
for about 2 or 3 weeks.
yeah.
So my birthday's in August, so it would be the first 3 weeks of August.
That sounds
So
fabulous.
yeah, I hope it can work out. So I'm basically just back to work, trying to sell some stuff that I don't need, trying to make some money back to do that.
Yeah.
And then I may be in touch with some people from the Finger Lakes about going there in September and working a
Oh
grape
yeah,
harvest.
the winery thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that will be till November, but we'll have to see.
Yeah. Cool. Well,
So yeah,
before we say goodbye, any shout outs that you want to give to whether it's people that helped you or friends or in the music industry, whatever you want to give a shout out to?
I'll give a shout out to the guy, Rick Lindley, of all people, this guy that picked me up in Hancock, Maryland, and helped me fix my bike. He was the most wonderful person I have ever met.
Oh, that's
It was
awesome.
unbelievable.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was so warm. I made some great friends along the way, and I'd like to say hey to them. So yeah, it was really nice. Everybody should take a bike trip, even if it's for 2 days. Go do it.
Oh, yeah. And, important question. Do you still have the bike?
I do.
Okay.
It is.
All right.
It's broken. It's kind of disassembled right now. I've got to get some work done to it. So the chain has to be replaced, and the shifter cable and housing replaced.
Okay.
So,
Sure.
so,
Sure.
so
Well,
I'm looking at my mountain bike. I'll probably get it out in a week or two and go ride some trails around the lake.
yeah, I was going to say, it sounds like that would be some beautiful biking from what you described when we first started today.
Yeah, it's gorgeous.
Yeah.
The assault on Mount Mitchell is also held in my town. It's a 150-mile bicycle race that starts in Spartanburg and goes to the top of Mount Mitchell, which is the highest point on the East Coast. And that's an all on-road race, and it's an international race. There's several thousand people participate in it every year.
Sounds
But
like some suffering.
yeah, I will not be taking part.
Maybe you'll be there to get a photograph or two, right?
Yeah, it takes a part of the route is on my road, so you can sit in a chair and
Oh,
watch it.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah, it's neat.
You can kick back and have a beer while they go up the
Yes,
mountain.
yes.
Well, if people want to either follow the trip that you've been on, or maybe follow other parts to your life, is there any contact info you want to share?
Yeah, I can share my as far as bicycling, I'm on Instagram, but I didn't share any pictures on this. I'm not like I'm not trying to get like sponsorship or anything.
Yeah.
This is just kind of my own thing. I only have maybe 80 friends on Instagram, and I really never shared anything. I thought about writing a book about it.
Oh, yeah.
Because there's so much stuff that went on a daily basis, and pretty funny stories. It's kind of like a tell-all. I thought about doing that, but I haven't began working on it. As far as music goes, you can find me at bengibbs.bandcamp.com. I have a few albums on there. A lot of music is on there. And then for a podcast I do, it's you can find it it's called loveandlightbridge.buzzsprout.com. And so it's a character I made up that has a podcast on there. I grew up in a pretty crazy, wild, fundamental Southern Baptist church in North Carolina, where people are screaming and yelling and running around and doing all this wild stuff, And so I always heard that style of preaching, and it's really quite traumatic, to like experience it. But I made this character up called Brother Jeremiah Lightbridge, Enlightened Evangelist. And I kind of do that style of preaching, but I preach Eastern texts like the Tao Te Ching, and I put congregation sounds in it to where it sounds like it's a live auditorium, but it's all kind of made up. And I write original music for it. It's pretty funny, and everybody that's listened to it, they like it. But if you grew up in the South or any sort of Southern Baptist church, you'd really probably like it a lot.
You would connect with what it means. Yeah,
because I'm kind of poking fun at it. So.
Awesome. And for listeners who are going back to the music that you mentioned, is it GIBBS as far as Ben Gibbs?
Correct.
Okay. All right. So everyone look for Ben Gibbs that way.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And
thank
I
you
love,
so much.
Yeah, your adventures as far as C&O and the Gap and Empire State and maybe going to Spain. Like you have all kinds of great things that people will want to hear about.
Yeah, I'm trying to stay on the move this year.
Yeah, it's awesome. All right. Well, thanks, Ben.
Thank you so much.
Well, listeners, that's it for this week. Email me at murphologypodcast@gmail.com if you have a topic or the name of a cyclist you find interesting. Support my podcast at patreon.com/murphology and visit both my Facebook and Instagram pages for daily entertainment. Also, a quick shout out to Simmons Electric for sponsoring this episode. I have more great episodes in the pipeline, so I hope you continue to be a Murphology podcast listener. Thank you.